guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I make a decorative branch for my orchids. So I have this huge branch and it's already been treated and soaked and bleached overnight. And if you also want to keep it like this part not to rot, you can paint it with a marine sealer. Marine sealer, you can buy that from the hardware stores. It's the same as the sealer that most people use for painting boats. It's like waterproof. So there are two different kinds of moss that I'm using. A super moss, which is a preserved moss. This is not a live moss. This is the moss that I'm going to use to decorate only the part that I'm not attaching the orchids. But where the part wherein I'm attaching the orchids, the plant itself, I'm going to use a sphagnum moss. So if you like this video, keep on watching. Thank you so much and let's get started. So I'm going to use a hot glue gun using a hot glue stick to attach the super moss. You may treat or debug your branch by soaking it overnight with diluted bleach 1:2 ratio. Also, use a duct tape to wrap around on a branch and the bottom part. It's to make sure that your branch would not rot and you're not bringing pests indoors. So I'll be using a grow moss or sphagnum moss, a twine, and a super moss, which is a preserved moss. After spreading out your super moss, start putting hot glue on the surface of your branch. You have to really do this quickly because you have to attach the moss before the hot glue dries up. Otherwise, you have to put more hot glue to reinforce it and make it stick to the branch. The moss is a little bit fluffy, so you need to press it down when you attach the moss on the branch to secure it properly. To make your orchid moss pole decorative and aesthetic, try to arrange the moss to show texture and color so it will look pretty. Alternating the colors and different textures will make it look like a living art. You can find this super moss and purchase it from craft stores and plant nurseries. When doing this project and handling tools like a hot glue gun, always think about safety. Touching right now is a Spanish moss. It has a different color from the super moss. When you're done attaching all the moss around the branch, you can start trimming using a scissors. Trim those that are sticking out and uneven, and make it look like a natural layer. You can always reinforce with hot glue for those moss that are sticking out. Place the decorative moss pole inside the planter and let it stand and position it the way you like it to be. You can use rocks to fill in halfway of the planter, but here I'm using decorative rocks, which I already have. Filling up your planter with rocks halfway, make sure it's stable enough to stand. Now it's time to prepare your orchids. I bought these Phalaenopsis orchids from the store. They usually come in plastic, so you need to remove the plastic and soak it in water to loosen up the moss. This may take a few hours, so you need to check on it. Once it's loosened up, you can start removing the sphagnum moss. If you're buying orchids from a regular store or from the grocery store, they usually are already sitting there for a long time and the moss is already old. So it's important to replace the moss with fresh moss. Removing the moss would also let you check on the status of the roots if you have any root rot. Most of the time, there's always a root rot when you buy orchids from the grocery store because they just get these plants from a supplier and sometimes it's been sitting there and employees tend to overwater it because they're not really trained to take care of orchids. After removing the sphagnum moss, I usually let water run so I can see and remove the excess dirt from the roots. Running water for me will make the roots more visible and I can see the root rot if there's any. Guys, it's not that I'm OCD that I have to clean everything, but checking on the roots is always important because once you transplant your plant in another substrate, you want to make sure that there's no root rot to let the plant grow healthy. You can always use a pruner to remove the rotten part and make sure you disinfect your tool with hydrogen peroxide before using it. That is to prevent contamination. Removing all the root rot, you can start preparing your orchid mix. My orchid mix consists of orchid bark, perlite, and I add some clay pebbles or leca. I fill in orchid mix in the remaining space of the planter and put in my orchid with sphagnum moss. I reinforce the orchid using a twine to keep it stable until the plant gets established. Orchids love humidity, so putting sphagnum moss can keep the moisture in. If you like, you can also wrap around Spanish moss around your orchids to make it decorative. Plant get the required humidity, you can put a humidifier right next to it or use a fine mister in between to mist the plant. This is the type of mister that I'm using for almost all of my houseplants. It gives a really fine mist without hurting the leaves of the plants. So guys, I hope you enjoyed watching this video and you like the orchid moss pole that I made and shared with you. So thank you so much and I'll see you next time.